So my name is Andrew Ellsworth. I run a company based here in Pittsburgh called Unhinged. I'm going to talk today about commercial building material reuse. Be very specific about this. This is about reuse of mostly commercial interiors. So things you would see in office buildings, universities, maybe things like hospitals and some other retail and use types like that. But the base of this is we get that big kind of pile of materials that's coming out of all these commercial buildings separate from what's happening in residential and kind of more historic oriented reuse. So this is a general rundown of how I'm going to go through this. Can I just get a quick pepper of like what your particular role is, whether you run a reuse center, you're in deconstruction, you are an architect, just kind of shout it out. Cool? Uh-huh. Reuse retail. Yeah, okay.
Window restoration.
Cool. Anything we didn't hear?
Workforce development.
Very cool. Awesome. What's that?
Fabrication.
Fabrication. Cool. Okay, so I'm not going to talk that much about, I wasn't planning on talking that much about how I acquire materials in my business. It's not just going to be about my business, it's going to be more broadly, but if you really are interested in that, I can talk about it, so feel free to kind of pepper me with questions. So I'll start with a little bit of statistics, and I'm going to show this slide that we've seen several times already. My numbers are a little different. And I'm sitting there looking at everyone's slide. I had to go back and look at it, actually. So the comparison of municipal solid waste to C&D, the big number of C&D of 540 million includes a huge amount from road and bridges. So I kind of took all that out. And when you look at the number of just buildings, it's 169 million tons. Nothing to slouch at, right? Like that's a lot of material. EPA did a study, the most recent one was actually back in 2003, unfortunately, that characterized that C&D stream down into commercial and residential. So we're actually seeing more material coming out on the commercial side than the residential side. So that was part of why I wanted to establish this business. And in particular, I wanted to zoom in really on this renovation piece right here, which is really a lot of these commercial interiors that are getting cleared and rebuilt, be every 3 to 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is. Whereas the cycle of renovation in the residential space is much longer. They aren't renovating their houses in their entirety every 5 years. Looking at this from a carbon perspective, I picked up some data that the Carbon Leadership Forum out of University of Washington in Seattle had done some research on the actual carbon footprint of various buildings and build-outs. So they had one for corn shell buildings, one for tenant improvements, and one for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And so when you look at like what they thought was the picture of what came out of what the carbon footprint of a building was, you're like, okay, that's corn shell, right? That's where all the carbon is. That's the steel, that's the concrete, that's the aluminum. But over time, when you start to see how these renovations start to happen, every 10 or 15 years, you're getting this whole slug of materials that's leaving and new materials coming in. And so at the end of the building's lifetime, you've actually amassed a huge amount of carbon just in your interior fit-outs, right? So both from a waste perspective and a carbon perspective, we really need to start looking at this. I will show you, you all are obviously in tune with this. When you look at a pound, let me go back to this about one second. What's cool about this is how they looked at kind of the whole build out and not look at per unit analysis. Because per unit analysis can be misleading in terms of not knowing how much of any given product is used. But if you do look at it that way, reuse is going to kick ass any day of the week, right? We see over 95, 99% reduction in carbon against a comparative new product. You all probably know this, but when you look at the stark numbers, it's really significant. And so when you compare what it takes to take a product out of a building, put it on a truck, and send it to a warehouse, it is light years beyond. I mean, literally, it's like infinitesimal compared to new materials. So that's kind of the background. I'll talk about my company, Doors Unhinged. So this isn't that hard, right? We find doors in buildings, we take them, we separate them, and then we sell them back. Da, da, da. No, it is truly it's what we consider a very circular business, right? That is basically what that door looked like on that end, and then here it is again. By the way, anyone going on the tour tonight to Millvale? If you go to the bathroom, you will walk through these doors. So that's from the Millvale Energy and Food Hub. What I think is important in thinking about this is we don't really consider ourselves a deconstruction company or a reclamation company. We sell materials. We are a vendor of commercial door systems. That is our business. If we don't do that, this doesn't work. None of this will ever work. We will collapse under the weight of materials being amassed, right? So we focus on what actually generates income and make our business work, and that is selling commercial door systems. Some of the common questions I get is, well, why'd you choose doors? It's not that I'm a door dork. I am, but that really wasn't the reason. Looked around to identify what materials in commercial interiors are going to be easily reusable. And the way you do that is you got to make money. So there have some level of value component to it. Fairly standardized. Has to come out in good shape. And the way I like to think about it is not necessarily structural. Very, very shaky about structural materials, right? Using structural steel, you got to go through a lot of hoops to do that. But a non-structural product like a door, it's a good option. Frequently landfilled in the sense that there's really not another outlet for it. Recycling of wood doors primarily you can't really do that. There's no real process in place for it. And so generally they just get hacked up. These doors often weigh between 100 and 125 pounds each. So they're actually quite an effort to get out of a building in one piece. And what typically happens is they saw it in half and then tear it in two pieces. A fair amount of work and effort and cost for disposal. So here's our value proposition. So when we go into a space, we don't get paid at the moment. I would like for the latter to change, but for now this is where we are. It costs us essentially in labor and transportation about $10 to $20 to get a door. To get it to our warehouse, contractor, meanwhile, would probably spend about that much as well. So we're doing them a real favor, and they have no problem having us in generally. Union, non-union, quick timeline, long timeline. I've done it all, right? They're cool with it. They're like, get that out of our way. We're happy to see that gone. And frankly, what I hear is we're happy to see that good stuff get reused. So what we do is we got a pretty good, really good deal on it, essentially. And so something that might cost $500 to $1,000 is a whole system. Take this door over here, for example. The big money here, so this frame is going to cost about $150. This is a knockdown frame as it happens. The door, I think that's wood. This door is probably going to be about $200, $220 new. This is the money right here. $600 for this lock set. Can you believe it? Right? That is usually trash, right? So if I turn that around, I can get $300 for that for someone where they might have paid $1,000, right? And so all of a sudden the value proposition gets to be pretty noticeable, and you can start to get the attention of people who are looking at their budget and saying, well, a door's a door, and so I'm not that hung up on exactly what it looks like. So if you can save me across my project thousands of dollars, not the tens of dollars or hundreds of dollars, you'll start to get people's attention. Another thing that makes us very unique is that we are B2B. We do not have a storefront. We sell to contractors, we work with architects, we work with developers. And in that sense, we're really filling the role that of a vendor, of an architectural product supplier that would normally be servicing these projects, right? So what that means is we have to deliver the entire package of materials. We are the door supplier, right? And that comes with some responsibility to make sure everything works, everything is provided, it's warranted, and that they get what they want. Basically, either we've negotiated or we supply what's provided on the drawings. And the contract, everyone has to be happy as a result. No half packages, damaged materials, right? We got to jump through all those hoops of the standards that go along with commercial construction. By the way, this is a picture of our warehouse. I am offering an open house tomorrow afternoon if anyone wants to visit. So the way we make money, honestly, is we get doors and we sell doors, right? This particular project, I actually got these because I knew a client wanted them. And so it was about 150 8-foot maple doors. And I know they're freaking heavy, right? And people are probably just cringing at the weight of this. So it cost me about $1,000 between labor and transportation. Doesn't really count my time. To go in, strip all these doors, pile them up, get them out of the building, onto a truck, into my warehouse. I did have to buy some new racking to accommodate them. That was another $1,000. 15 of them I've already set up to be sold to this one project. I was hoping for more. That's how it worked out. So I'm going to charge about $2,000 for those 15 doors, which is roughly what's in that pile. The kicker is the hardware that goes with it, that came out of this, is like almost $8,000. Right? And so just this one project, I've already made way over my margin from what my costs in are. Granted, there are other costs. I have insurance, I have my warehouse, I have a truck, you know, but that's the essence of the value proposition. There's value to the whole process of figuring out what goes into a project, getting the materials together and delivering that. And there is value in that. So that's essentially what happens in a markup. Right? You can mark up the materials because you've made it more valuable for them. So what's required in actually being able to do this, the most important thing, so did anyone say there were an architect? One back here. Two, okay. So what you really need to be able to do is to be able to navigate a set of architectural documents and to be able to understand what the project is asking for. And then you have to essentially correlate that with what you have. And what I often do is I say, well, I don't have exactly that, but I have this. Would you consider this at the price that's, right? And that's how we start to, again, get their attention. Because I specialize, I know these materials in and out. There are people that know a lot more than me about doors, but I know a lot more than the average contractor or architect. They rely on their vendors to be the experts in the materials. They aren't the experts. They rely on me to figure out how this whole door package is coming together. And that involves the integration of the 3 components, the frame, the door, and the hardware. And they all come from different places, and they basically have to magically fly together and all work perfectly. It's a fair amount of coordination, but once you understand it, you can make it work. So you got to know what stuff costs now. And what I like about being in a commodity business, I'm selling commodity material. Right? I'm not selling antiques. I'm not selling vintage items. It's pretty clear what comparison to something new is, right? You know what the value of your good is. You know what they would have to pay otherwise. And I think that's one of the things that's unique about it. I mean, there's all this other stuff you gotta have, is like, you gotta have hustle, right? You gotta be really willing to get out there. You gotta have connections to architects and the contractors and things like that to get onto projects. You do have to have patience. Project lead times can be months, right? And so holding on to inventory, right? I'm finding inventory. Sometimes I'm purchasing materials. I haven't gotten paid yet, right? So I kind of have to manage my cash flow as well. So what's hard about this? Lots. We got to do a lot of matching. It's no small feat. It's a big puzzle to say, okay, they have all these things, and I have these things. Wait, what goes with what? And if I put this hardware goes that, well, the door wasn't prepared for that, so I'm going to have to switch that preparation. That one has a little hole where someone put a coat hook in. I'm going to have to fill that. All right, those hinges don't match those frames. Okay, how are we going to do this? Right, so you got to basically sit down, document everything. Let me actually jump a little bit and mention one thing. Whoops, where am I? On the left here, can you see the number by the door? That's basically a field photo before I took the doors out. And I number doors so I can A, take a photo of them, and B, track them. Because there's a lot of criteria that go along with that door. The size, the finish, the swing, the hardware, and so on and so forth, right? And so we track inventory on a per unit basis. Like, I know what I have, right? And that's critical when you go to match it up, especially when you get to scale. It's like, you can't ask your customer to come into your warehouse and walk around and pick out what they like. They don't want to do that. That's your job, right? It's your job as a supplier to be like, here it is. You can come see it, but this is what I've chosen out for you. at the warehouse. The design and construction process can be complicated. I'll talk about that more in a second. Was anyone here for Greg LaForest's presentation before lunch? Show of hands. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what he was talking about, but from the perspective of a vendor. Some of these other things you also understand. Perception of inferiority. That's nothing new in the reclaimed material space, right? It's like, you can't charge as much because it's beat up. I don't want used. I'm sorry, our project doesn't do used. Thank you, though. Inventory is expensive to hold depending on what you're doing and where you are. Doors are big, hardware small, right? Okay, so this is kind of a brief version of what Greg talked about. So the basis of a construction project, a few stages, right? You figure out what you need, where you're going to go. The architect designs it. It gets bid. There's a lot of little, squeezing stuff out that maybe we don't have money for. It gets built, and then someone moves in. So looking at who the players are, banks on the top, suppliers on the bottom. And literally credit works that direction, right? Everyone's getting credit from the people below them, essentially. They have to get goods before they deliver the money, right? So sadly, this is where I land. This is where a supplier would land. And so you may be working for a subcontractor, you may be working directly for a contractor, but all these other people are involved. So again, this is the process. I'm digging more to the design part. And these are essentially the steps that are required as a vendor and as a supplier. So what's important here is we would love to get involved early on where people say, we really want these doors, let's pick out the doors and we'll integrate them into the design. That's perfect, right? It doesn't happen that often. We're working with Phipps here on a new building they're doing several miles away that really drawn out design process, really laborious and thoughtful about exactly what they want to accomplish, community input, and they allowed me to come in and participate in that process really early in the design phase so we can start them thinking about how much it costs, what's available, what do they want. Generally what happens is you get to review things when they're in the bidding phase. And the bidding phase is based on construction documents that Greg talked about, which has two parts. The drawings and the specifications, a giant pile of paper that could be thousands of pages. And you have to find what's important in yours. These are also called contract documents. And what that means is the contract by which the contractor is going to deliver the project with the owner is based on these documents. And if there's ever confusion, you go back to the documents and you say, well, what did you say that you were going to provide based on these documents? Poorly written documents or poorly written contracts. You have to be careful of that as well. So you're going to essentially go through all this information and you have to do what are called takeoffs, right? You have to look at the drawings and say, this is what we're looking for doors. I need this number of doors, this number of frames, this hardware set, these are the swings. Okay, but here's what I have used, here's what I have new, here's the freight, the tax, all that, my labor, that's my price. And I submit it to them, hopefully I get awarded. Down the line though, I have to actually provide a little more documentation. Something called submittals, which essentially are documents that say exactly what you're going to provide. In the proposal phase, you're not going to say, well, I want this, I'm going to provide you some lock sets. In this phase, you say, it's going to be this manufacturer, this is the color, this is the style of the lever, right? All these different model numbers and things like that. And the architect may review it. They may want samples, right? And then they get approved, and at that point, you're essentially ready to deliver it. You actually have to get your materials ready. You have to fulfill the order, and you have to deliver it, generally. They're not going to come pick it up. After that, you got to get paid. And that involves managing any change orders. If there were changes made during the construction process, you have to document that. You have to get approval for it, and then you got to get paid on it. Certain closeouts, things like warranties are required for you to essentially get your money back out of the project. That's a simplified way of looking at what the life is of a material vendor. How are we doing on time? All right. So what you really have to be the expert in the situation. because the architect generally knows less than you about that specific product. The architect knows a whole lot, but they don't necessarily know the absolute deep nuance of closers and panic bars, right? And so you have to advise them and say, I don't think you want to do this. Don't really go together. Or you've put this on, but that's at odds with the building code, which says you're not allowed to do that, right? There's some of that you're going to have to advise on as well. In liabilities case, everyone gets implicated in lawsuits in the construction industry. Everybody gets dragged in, architect, developer, contractor, whoever. So it hasn't happened to me yet. You have to believe in the quality of your product, and you have to deliver a quality product, right? It's not, yes, we deliver products as is, but we deliver very good products as is. An interesting thing about our specific business is when we don't have the materials available to complete the whole project, which is most, we strive to hit about 75 or 80%, we have to buy the rest. So we have to buy essentially from our competition. The people that were the high bids on the project when we were the low bids, I got to go and buy materials from them. I'm not getting the same deals that they are from the manufacturers. I got to pay their markup, right? So I have to absorb that a little bit, which is why I don't want to pick up a product that only has 10% of my materials, because I have to pay someone else their markup, and I probably won't even end up being the low bidder in that case. So you got to be able to build that supply chain. Thankfully, I have a couple suppliers I work with that are cool with it. They're like, hey, we like what you do, and you're paying us, so what's to argue about? You're going to have to get into the field. You got to show up. I've had generally each client has come to my warehouse once, and I've been to the field 10 times, right? That's customer support. You got to take care of them. They say, hey, this thing's broken, come and fix it. You go, you show up, you fix it. Where we want to go from here, so essentially we sell as-is products. You know, a lot of people ask, do you refurbish? And the answer is not really. I don't think there's a huge amount of, there's a fair amount of cost in that. I don't think we can charge as much for that. I'll review that though. We're going to keep looking at that. Remanufacturing is our next big step, hopefully. So doors are essentially built on a mostly particle board core with a little bit of MDF, about 1/8 of an inch on either side, and then like a veneer that's less than 1/32 of an inch. And the problem that people have with doors is the veneer, right? You know, it got a little dinged up, it doesn't match their new layout, whatever. I didn't like that hardware. And so essentially our process is going to be to take down the veneers, leave the majority of the core intact, and then send it back to a door plant to be remanufactured into a new door. We'll fill all the holes that had levers and stuff like that. Voila, your owner has the door they're looking for, but yet you were able to deliver a 90% clean product, right? That's cool. There's so much sale of hardware. Again, the money's in the hardware. The impact's in the door. How do we figure this out, right? There's a premium probably for us to remanufacture doors. I'm hoping to essentially create a big flow of doors that also captures a lot of hardware. And we can deliver a huge amount of savings on the hardware. And so how do we essentially build a complementary operation that essentially can bring the cost back down by utilizing hardware that's generally in super good shape, again, very high cost, long lifetime, lightly used, all that. Before we get to that, we may just start selling them online. There are a huge number of hardware retailers online. If you have any of this hardware that shows up, I would advise you to kind of look in that direction. Like the closer on this door, I haven't looked closely at it. This one, that is a $300 closer, right? In your store, I would imagine you might sell that for 30 bucks, max, right? But you could sell that online for 120 probably. That said, there is a door. Did you notice the door coming out here actually from the special events hall that would swing open and slam shut? That closer has failed. Don't try and sell that closer. Someone will be upset. Another thing we'd like to do with Construction Junction, this is in concept right now. This is a little smaller scale, but we now have this capability and this understanding around doors. I think there's a barrier to customers wanting to buy doors. They don't want to do the rest of the work to essentially get it frame ready. You know, their contractor wants to slip it in to the wall and nail it in just like they would buy from Home Depot. And so what's missing is the jamb that matches the door. And so we have all this knowledge and skills and equipment. We're hoping to essentially start building those to order based on what the customer wants. So the customer spends $40 on a door. We charge them $80 for a jamb. A little high, but for $120, they're basically still paying less than what they would pay at Home Depot for a complete package. Throw some hinges in, all that. And they can go pick out their hardware if they want to be special about it. We may also look at installation of materials. That's a question, but I do get some interest with that. That does raise issues with unions and things like that. Okay, so what other materials could we do this for? That's an interesting question. I started this business essentially in the interest of trying to encourage others to start their own businesses, right? The idea of specializing is that if we all work together in our own specialty, maybe we can have a pretty big impact. Maybe we can have economies of scale in going into buildings together, selling to clients together, and fulfilling orders together. That's exciting to me. I did start with doors because I thought I had the best shot at this, having had no one in this field to have any precedent really to look to. So that big number from the beginning, there's about 32 million tons a year of waste. The majority of that corn shell waste is going to be things we're not going to be able to deal with, right? Concrete and steel. Some people may deal with that. That's probably not going to be me. The tenant stuff is pretty interesting because it's by nature very modular, very small, right? It has to get into a building, up an elevator typically, right? So you don't have these big, massive custom things. It's stuff that's typically off the shelf in some regard or easily manufactured. Because of the frequency in which it's turned over, it's often brand new. And frankly, I think it looks so much like what goes in again. You know, we tear out all this space and we build a space that looks so similar in the types of materials. It has ceiling tile, it has carpet, it has doors, right? It has walls. There's not an infinite palette of materials out there, right? It's pretty limited. So these are materials that I would argue are things that could be considered for use and something to essentially invest in a specialty company in. Will I get to it? Maybe. Will you get to it? Hopefully. I've heard of one company in the Michigan area doing carpet tile, which I think is pretty cool. Things that just come out that are in such good shape. Carpet tile is great because broadloom is such a mess and already cut it into specific lengths. Carpet tiles, there's going to be some bad ones. Don't save those, right? Save the good ones. They are pretty expensive. They come out very easily. They stack very easily. Casework, I haven't been convinced on casework. I didn't start there for a reason because it can be very custom in terms of the sizes, the heights, the functions, et cetera, and so forth. The laminate that might be on it. Does anyone know what these are? Can you really tell? So this is essentially a version of a VAV box, which is in the ceiling. It's not the main mechanical unit. It's a subunit that might control a room or two that essentially says, all right, the temperature from the ceiling came in at rooftop came in at 55, but I need this room at 68. Oh wait, now I need it at 72. And so that essentially controls airflow, and you see coils on here, you might end up with a hot water system that's going to reheat it again. They're cheap, but this is a pile in a building that's ready to be thrown out. Super's like, do you want those? I was like, me personally, no, but I'm interested enough to take a picture of them. Stuff like that, right? That's very modular, right? It has some specifications that you would need to learn, like what, from an engineering perspective, is like, what's the heat flow on this, right? How much does it deliver? What's the airflow? Like all these things are ordered in size, but they're often off the shelf. The rooftop unit is probably going to be custom. And frankly, by the time you get to it, it's going to be obsolete because by the time they're taking that whole building down, it's going to be 50 years old. This stuff that's just in the ceiling may get tossed within 5 or 10 years, right? Sometimes it gets reused, sometimes it doesn't. All those smaller things, I think there's great options. If you see any of these light scene things, oh my God, these are so expensive, right? If you can develop that ability to capture that material and then be the person who's selling that and making that available consistently, that's how we're going to build customers, right? That's how we're going to build repeat customers. And frankly, that's how the commercial space is going to work. You end up working with the same contractors over and over again because you've built a relationship with them. They trust you. They trust your materials, right? Very different than the residential sector where you're going to often deal with one homeowner a couple times, right? It's hard to really nurture that relationship along. So this is where I would argue I think it should go. And I think I've talked to a lot of people that would plug in really well to really kind of big network that I would model after the multi-listing service for residential real estate, which essentially you have, think of this for residential houses, right? You have all these different houses on the market. You know, they're all the houses that are out there. Some are on the market, some aren't. If you didn't have kind of a central platform and network to work through, you'd be stuck driving around trying to find what house is for sale. Someone thought to solve that problem, they're called brokers, right? And they know what's out there because they all work together, even though they're competitors, and they built a platform called the MLS. And that platform allows everyone to understand the flow of real estate, essentially. What's available, being sold, what's the price? And they set all these very specific criteria about how you judge the value and the characteristics of a property. So I argue that, you know, a website is great, but we need the enterprises around it that can plug in, that can essentially connect the buildings that have the materials they're going to get rid of to the buildings that are buying materials. They're never going to connect each other, right? Just like no one's going to chase me down and figure out exactly which doors they're going to get out of my warehouse. That's my job, right? All these other people in the middle can do that. And there's money to be made for that because these materials are valuable. That's my argument. We're going to need all these deconstruction companies. We're going to need all the storage centers that we've been talking about that I'm really excited about what's happening there. And I think we can accomplish a lot of the same goals, right? How do we recover the material, right? How do we create new enterprise and create jobs and build wealth?